everyone, and welcome to Reality Plus Us. I'm Dr. Helen Papagiannis.
And I'm Bar-Zeev. And we're going to be talking today about design fiction with our special guest, Julian Bleecker. Welcome. We have with us Julian Bleecker, engineer, tinkerer, deep thinker on the intersection of engineering, design, and humanity. He's co-founder of the Near Future Laboratory and a guru of design fiction. Welcome, Julian.
Thanks. Wonderful to be here, you guys.
So people should know that Julian and I have known each other for a really long time, probably about 30 years at this point. Although not all of it has been necessarily keeping in contact, but recently we got back in touch. And so when we started this podcast, Helen and I thought, who better to be our first guest than Julian, because I happen to know him and he happens to be a really amazing person. And we were going to talk a little bit about where we met first, since we were both kind of junior at the time.
Yeah, we were 5 years old, right? Because it's been 30
Pretty
years.
much. It's been 30 years. So yeah, I think I could speak. And you joined the same startup company that I joined. This was this amazing dream of a startup company in 1992 that VR is finally here and we're finally ready to get going. 1992, remember? And it's going to take off any minute now. And so we started this company that was going to be a boutique kind of design and engagement firm that would build all your virtual worlds for you for whatever you needed. And you were at the Human Interface Technology Lab at the time. And so you knew our CEO, Bob Jacobson, because he came from there as well. There's a few of you that came. I didn't know any of you except for Sci.Virtual Worlds, the Usenet group that I met Bob on, and I drove cross country. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what you were doing at the HIT Lab at the time and why you decided to go join a new startup? What was your thinking?
Yeah. So if I look back at my thinking, so I definitely felt like the VR thing was it felt like it was a thing. Like it felt like it was going to be something that had legs, and I think a lot of that was already baked into the way I was thinking about VR because I found the lab accidentally because I'd been traveling across the country, and in my car I had like a little bin with things that I was that I was bringing along, and one of them was a Whole Earth Review article by Howard Rheingold about virtual reality. And I don't recall if it was like he had written the book Virtual Reality or if that's what it was about. I don't remember exactly. And I remember that I held that close because I was like, this sounds like a thing. It felt like a quest. It felt like I'm going to find out where this is happening. And this is all this is again, we were 5 years old, so this was before computers were connected in a robust way in which they are now, where you could just kind of Google like where is this and what's going on. So it became like really like the folded document that you would see that someone would have in their pocket when they make the big journey across the Atlantic to go to the new world. It's like I'm meant to go talk to this person. It felt like that. And when I managed to finally get to the HIT Lab, I'd already been in the Bay Area, so I'd visited Jaren at VPL, and they were super sweet and super nice, and they were like, well, we're not really hiring anything, but continue on, you're going to find something up at the HIT Lab. And so I went there, and Tom Furness, in a beautiful way, I don't know if he took pity on me or if he was kind of like, hey, here's someone we could bring into the lab, brought me on as a research assistant. And so there were just so many things that were happening that felt like, yes, this is a thing. Like so much affirmation and so much kind of like delivering of confidence. Yes, young man, you're on the right path. That it seemed like when this opportunity came up and Bob was starting this company, I can't even remember how that transaction went. Like if he was just kind of like, "Do you want to join?" or if I said like, "Hey, what about me?" or what was going on. It was very
Yeah.
kind of nebulous, but it felt like, hey, he's got a really great, eclectic, interesting, creative group of people.
Yeah.
There was a bit of a vision that I didn't quite, I don't think I was tuned in enough. I just felt the vibe of it. It was kind of like, you're walking around outside of a club and you hear some music and you kind of get carried by the crowd into the club and you're like, oh, here I am. Well, let's see what goes on. That was
This
how
is
I
where it's
felt.
at. It's totally
Yeah.
like that. I think, we had, just to set the context, Neil Stevenson hung out in our office to
Right. That's
learn
right.
about
Yeah.
virtual worlds. He'd already written Snow Crash, right? So it's not like we informed that book that came out the same year, I think. But he wanted to learn more. He wanted to know, how this was all going to go. And I remember talking to him about like, could we actually build this? Could we actually make Snow Crash? That anything was possible. And you're right, the internet wasn't a thing. And so we were all thinking at the time, boy, if the internet happens, it's going to be 3D, right? It's going to be spatial. It's going to be like William Gibson, right? It's like, you know, it's going to be all these visions that we've had. And of course, it didn't have to be. Like, the reality was, you know what? 2D page metaphors are actually kind of fine. People are comfortable with those. They don't need spatial computing just yet. So we were a bit early. And as it turned out, it was like, I think there were about 3 or 4 of us that weren't from the Hit Lab, and maybe 5 or 6 people that were. There were about 12 of us total. And 12 people in a startup company equals high burn rate. And the company ran out of money
a lot of people.
within the first 6 months. It just pretty much nosedived with not being able to pay anybody. So we all dissipated pretty fast. But you've gone on to do a bunch of really amazing stuff since. And it almost didn't matter that company only lasted 6 months, because it brought a bunch of people together with around this idea. And then we all went off to do really cool stuff anyway. So nothing could kind of hold us back, I guess, is the lesson to take from that.
Yeah. That just the way you describe it reminds me of, I forget, it was like one of the talk shows back in whenever, the 60s or 70s. And I remember someone pointing to me when like John Lennon was on, I don't know, David Susskind or something like that. And it's like, how could you guys break up? I mean, it was amazing. Like, look what I can't believe this is just like, I'm distraught. It's like, but look at all the beautiful things that happen on the other side of it.
Yeah.
You know, everyone has their own, they do their thing, and it didn't have to be, it was the right time. Maybe it's just like that 6 months that's what we needed in order to kind of, I don't know, like burn in enough of the sense of what can happen when you get, even just for 6 months, a bunch of people together in a room with a sense of, you know, spirit and kind of common focus and enthusiasm, maybe more than anything, and excitement. Yeah, because you went on to do like remarkable things on the other side of that. If you had been trapped, like being like a chief operations officer for this, you might have been like, "Oh, I don't think this was my path."
It opened up doors. I mean, trying and failing. I think I always advise people to take risks, because you never know. You may fail, but something else will come along after that might be even better. Helen, do you have experiences like that, or you want to tell us what you think about that?
Yeah, well, what I was going to say, it sounds like you were both very early on. I know in your book, the manual design fiction, you talk about signals and faint signals, and it almost seems like on your path to working with the Hit Lab with Tom Furness and just kind of tuning in to what was happening with VR. It's almost seemed like you were kind of following these faint signals, and you as well, Avi. I mean, doing this for such a long time, so. Yeah, what do you think about that? Like, tell us a little bit about faint signals and how they're clues into the future.
Yeah. Well, so Avi, you mentioned Neil Stevenson coming by, which I remember, you know, quite thoroughly, and we've come across each other in other projects over the years, and the between, you know, just trying to, you know, as a 5-year-old, trying to make sense of like, what is this science fiction writer doing here? It felt right. It felt like it made sense, but I didn't have the language to describe it. It was like, oh, this is cool. And you find out, you know, very, very quickly with someone like Neil in particular, it's like, oh, they're just like a wellspring of knowledge, and they're combining their knowledge, like, let's say, on the ground technical knowledge, whatever they might have been able to glean or learn from other people, with this beautiful sense of like, of story, I guess, in his case, and of being able to weave those into and move them from the away, move the technical knowledge, utility knowledge, just kind of sliding it more towards like imagination. Like, what else could this mean? What are the other ways in which we can make sense of the, you know, the technical specifications for, you know, like a VR setup, or the technical specifications for even like a chipset, you know, like you could see him like reading chipsets, like, oh, there are like a zillion stories in this one spec sheet, you know, around what it is and what it could be possible. And I found that I feel the feeling of that felt fascinating to me. And I, to the weak signal question, it's like, it's almost like seeing the world in these multiple possible ways. Like, it's not here yet, but
Yes.
I'm hearing something. Like, I'm just trying to tune in, and I just have enough to now know to activate my imagination to think about what could this possibly mean if this wasn't, and how can I not very quickly dismiss it as like, you know, I don't know, kids nowadays, I don't really think that'll become a thing. And inevitably, it, you know, it does at some level, but it's like, what does the world look like if that signal was just, amplified a little bit, but in a particular direction, not necessarily amplified. Well, I mean, I guess it doesn't matter, but like amplified in multiple directions. One direction is like, what does the marketplace look like if a thing like this was, existed in the world in a kind of hygienic way? And then what does a world look like if this thing was amplified? In other words, doing the more Neil Stevenson thing, like, there might be a mode in which he says, like, I can talk to you about what this looks like as a product in a very pragmatic sense. But I think he's more inclined to be like, let me tell you about a world in which this thing exists, and the stories and the people and the interactions and how it shifts and changes things. And I think that's the weak signal thing is like really developing a sense of being able to amplify those things. But I'll emphasize again, not just amplifying it in the direction of, hey, what's our product roadmap for the next 6 years because of this? Which I think, which is the utility thing, and which I think in most business contexts, people just like, don't tell me a story about it. Like, what am I going to do with that? Like, I've got a factory and I need to run this thing up. But I think having those stories activates the sense of possibility that I think a lot of people, even with the pressure of like, well, time's a ticking, like we gotta launch something, we gotta have something for the roadmap, we got the investor day coming up in 6 months, like what do we have? And I think even if you just start with the story, even if it was nothing but story, and you could draw people into that conversation of that amplified signal, like which is, I guess, good salespeople do, like, imagine a world. You're like, oh my God, you're right. Okay, where do I write a check? Like,
Yeah. So the narrative is key, right? You want to pull people along on the story, but there's a choice that's implicit in what you're saying, which is, are you going to tell a story about a thing, a product that maybe you need to build to make money? Or are you going to tell a story about a future? Are you going to talk about people and what people do? And that seems to be the difference between like really good stories, I think, really good fiction, and fiction that's just about technology or just about aliens. Or it's like, how do people deal? Like, what would reality look like if such and such happened? And such could be an invention, but it could also just as easily be a change in society, right? And I know you love Star Trek. Star Trek was really big into those what ifs. What if there were a race of people where they were half white and half black, and they switched sides, and that was the fight was about, are you left or right sided? And that kind of a what if can tell you a lot about reality, about ourselves. It lets you unpack a lot of things that are hard to unpack. And so you, now getting back to the book, as Helen said, you've written this book along with your 3 other co-authors, part of your near future labs folks, and it seems like there's a, and you say this, I think, but I want to hear how you phrase it. There's a purpose to this book. There's a purpose in to some degree. There's a purpose in the fact that people talk about design fiction and maybe they don't use it the same way that you would want them to use it. But you also really want to teach people in general how to do this thinking. You say often, imagine harder, right? That's a phrase you like to repeat a lot. And so what does that mean? What are you trying to get people to do maybe even differently than they do today with this book that is about specifically teaching us how to do design fiction?
Yeah. So the concise response is like, we need to imagine harder, but the elaboration is that. So we did the book, and it was a wonderful, very like relatively long process. But you've got four co-authors, um, and 3 of us together collectively have 4 PhDs. So there's a recipe for not getting anything done, in some kind of way. And so there was a lot of work that went into that. And I think in when it started, as often happens with projects that I kind of initiate, like I went to the rest of the gang, I said, like, we need to do a book. Like, we need something that, and my thinking was very pragmatic. It's like, well, you do a book and then you have a platform to sell a service, kind of thing, and whatever, go on the road, do that kind of thing. And that was the start of it. And I think during the process of the writing, I lost track of the purpose of the book outside of that. So I had this pragmatic thing, write a book, and then people will come knocking on the door and you'll do interesting projects. And after the book went out, and after matter of fact, it was after the first printing sold out, it was just like I had this wonderful feeling of like, wow, there's actually an audience for this. You know, it was incredible. It was incredible, and I was
Yeah.
humbled by it. And so it was unexpected. I was like, man, we're gonna grind on these copies forever. This is gonna take forever. And it was just like a few months. And then I just started to wonder. I was like, what is it about it? Because I think the book came out. I was very satisfied with it. It's like, oh, it was nicely illustrated. It's not too many words. It's got something for everyone, a bunch of points of entry, and people show me they're like this, just like filled with post-it stickies and stuff like this. Oh my God, this is amazing. And then I was like, but what is lurking beneath the surface that maybe people can't, they're not able to articulate? It's almost like, what was great about that concert you went to last night? It's kind of like, I don't know, it's just amazing. It's just good vibe. Like people were cool and everything. You're not like the mix was perfect, it's like I felt good on the other side of it. I don't know what to tell you. And so I really wanted to understand what that was. And that's when I started, kind of just reorienting around the purpose, which I'll be very honest with you, I don't even know if I had the language to describe the purpose when we went into the project, back in whenever it was. It was at the end of 2019 when we all got together in Geneva, and I was like, we need to do a book. Um, and when I stopped to reflect on it, it became kind of apparent, which was that this is a book basically saying like basically giving like an instruction manual on how to imagine in a particular way. How do you translate your dreams, hopes, fears, desires, ambitions into a form that is legible, in another way than what we typically associate those kinds of, sort of more on the feeling side of the house, a different form. And so typically, if you're an imaginative person and you manage to work through the struggles of being an imaginative person in a world that's very rational and kind of like efficiency oriented, you're like, well, I'll become an artist, I'll become a musician, maybe I'll become, like a writer, and then all the pressure associated with those things, because most people would be like, man, tough racket, that writing thing, isn't it? Like how many
Oh, yeah.
rejection letters? And you have all that thing of like, oh yeah, I'm accumulating rejection letters, which is valid, but also kind of like it's a way of helping to manage and deal with the challenges of being a person who's like, you know what, I just can't help it. I imagine these things, I see these different worlds, and I'm going to try writing. I'm going to try to be a filmmaker. Maybe I'll interpret the feelings I have into music or dance. All those kinds of things that are kind of over there, right? And what I noticed, having done kind of the design fiction thing for since whenever, like since 2008, when I kind of really sat down to say design fiction and write an essay, and with Bruce Sterling, so sitting beside me, was that it's a way of translating imagination into a kind of structure that operates really beautifully on people, because they're like, wait, this looks like something from the other side of the house.
Right.
This looks like something that this isn't a musical score. This isn't a ballet. This isn't a painting or even a photograph. This is, wait, what is this? Kind of, you get that little bit
Exactly.
of kind of, beautiful, wonderful confusion that in my armchair, neuroscience is like an unlock, where all of a sudden people are seeing something they don't expect, and then if it's done in a way, I tend to use humor and satire quite a bit, so it's done in a way where it's like there's a soft entry into this other world. It's like a pillow, poof, whoa, this is crazy, what is this? As opposed to being antagonistic. Some, like, lots of science fiction will do that, or contemporary, where it's like you wind up in an apocalyptic ruin, which doesn't really help anyone. It's just kind of
No,
like,
it's more like,
it's,
what would I do in that situation? Like, I don't know. I guess I would die probably,
yeah, I would
but
probably die. My
yeah,
aim is really bad, and I
yeah,
don't run very quickly.
exactly.
I'd be
But
that guy who just got vaporized. Oh my God, that's
that,
terrible.
yeah, just as an aside, that's why I like the ones that the story is like The Road, where it's just like just a dad and a kid. Like that's
Hmm.
me. That's what I would do. Is I would just barely
Mm,
survive, and and just have one goal, is to get my kid there. That would be like it. That would be
yeah.
enough. But what you're describing with the book is kind of, you've laid out a bit of a process. People love process, right? they can
Mhm.
they can look at a process as something they can do right or wrong, and you can critique that, how well you do it, like yoga or meditation or anything else like that. But you've laid out some rules by which, if you do it this way, you can be at least promised a certain kind of result, right? and if you do it, you get something close if you follow the rules. What do you think about that? You're like kind of like, that's why I called you a guru, is because you're kind of like turning into the yoga master of a certain kind of design practice.
Yeah. Yeah, that's generous of you to say. Like there's there, I think it's this play, it's this dance between imagination and structure, where maybe the practice of design fiction um, is a bit of a negotiation between, for very many of us, this kind of like split in our psyche, which is like, we all dream, and then we all, most of us get up and go to work, and so we're contending with that dynamic. And I I I think what design fiction is able to do is it's able to bring those two into collaboration, almost like knit them together in a way.
Mm.
And I think that's the feeling that people get. It's like, I can be a product designer, but I can also be like really imaginative, especially if you're in an organization, you're fortunate enough to be able to have the opportunity to do design fiction, not just as an offsite kind of like exercise or that, or like something you do at lunch, but as part of your what you're expected to do in, let's say, a product evaluation and development life cycle. It's like, hey, okay, time for some new ideas. We're going to spend the first 3 weeks doing our design fiction phase of it. I don't know, whatever waterfall would be with design fiction, and that means that we're going to work within the structure and our own understanding and appreciation of what we do as an organization. Let's say we make pickleball rackets, right? And so we're in that space. And what we're going to do is we're going to get all of our ideas out through a series of engagements, conversations, workshops, however you want to phrase it, and we're going to represent these as our I don't how far out to racquetball people. So like as our 2026 product catalog, right? So and so all we're open, and we better not just see rackets, because you're going to know at some point that, I mean, if Venice Beach, the Venice Beach boardwalk is anything like anywhere else, it's like that's going to commodify very, very quickly, very quickly. And so what else is there? And so in that catalog, I don't want to just see products. I want to see festivals. I want to see collabs with people, not even within sport, like all the things that you would expect someone to do. But I want you to represent it not as an idea on a Post-it note up on a whiteboard, but go into that world as if you went there, and somehow you were magically transported to the year 2026, and you saw this catalog on the ground, be like, oh my God, this is full with all these great ideas, that stuff I never would have thought of. Like, live in that world. Sports supplements, I don't know, oh, look, hey, check it out, we were featured on the Good Morning America. Like, wow, okay, we've really, all that kind of stuff. And that's the bringing imagination into and in collaboration with structure being this job. We got to figure out what we're going to do, and we've got all these, there's all these documents that define who we are and what we do and what we're expected. But you're not going to do imagination into a painting of someone playing pickleball. You can be like, where else does my imagination go with this?
Yeah, I love that. And I also love how in the book you talk about the audience filling in the blanks. And so using their imagination as well to kind of fuel what that future is. And one of the things I think about too is, I know you talk about these archetypes. So things like a digital catalog or an object that you might see in daily life. And one of the things I wonder about and I'm curious about is, if we were to feel the future, how can we use the senses beyond just the visual or maybe audio with like a narrative and a video? How can we use things like touch and smell and taste? And is that a part of design fiction that helps us to imagine the future with like our full human sensorium? And I know you've mentioned Superflex comes up in the book a couple of times. And there's this one example from them where they created this pollution gun for the United Arab Emirates. And it's part of this book I'm reading right now called The Good Ancestor.
The Good Ancestor.
Yeah, you have it too? Twins.
There you go.
Yeah. And so there's a section in here that talks about Superflex's work. And so they created a pollution machine. And that allowed ministers to breathe in a mixture of carbon monoxide, sulfur dioxide, and nitrogen dioxide. And so that represented the predicted air quality in the UAE in 2034 if they continued polluting at current rates. So according to Superflex, having these ministers stick their nose in the toxic fumes was among the factors that helped convince them to invest heavily in renewable energy. So I'm so curious about, like, again, beyond just visuals and audio, what might some examples there be, or what are the role of the senses in creating and imagining these futures through design fiction?
Yeah, this is the way you bring those, the imagination structure into collaboration. Imagination also, just kind of being a placeholder for the feeling, the way in which we sense make. And we're so heavily biased to sense make in a very rational way. Tell me the facts, send me the PowerPoint, just talk to me, talk to me straight about this, as opposed to imagine someone saying like, well, don't send me a report. Like what I really want is a stage play. Could you interpret everything that you're thinking about in that form, or as Superflex did wonderfully, like just this toxic kind
Toxic
of like
smell
mixture
gun.
of because it's a translation of something that exists in all these different all these different vectors. One is what you would expect in the context of talking to government ministers, which is they got an inbox and outbox, right? So they read white papers, reports. Just give me the cover sheet. I don't want to read the whole thing. What's the summary? And you're narrowing down the field of vision that they have, or the field of feeling that they have, for trying to sense make around this. And the expectation is that you sense make in a rational way, because look, it's a government and there's a lot of responsibilities, and we need to have the most efficient process for sense making. And what Superflex is challenging us to consider is like, hey, you're leaving 99.9% of our sense making abilities on the table when you do that. And if you can just get one more little thing, like let's smell it, like, oh, okay, good point, like that's effective. And if the, again, my armchair neuroscience, I think I'm right, because I've heard this a number of times. It's like we make sense of the world through feeling before anything else. So when you make a decision to like, for me it'd be bicycles. Make a decision about a new bike. It's kind of like, ooh, look at that. Ooh, yes. And then maybe, depending on how well regulated you are, you're like, okay, and how much is it? And what else? How many gears? I guess I should ask that question too. It's like, you go through these things. It's like you see a car. It's like, my car works perfectly fine, but it's like, wow, that one looks pretty sweet. Be nice to drive around in that. And I think when you're able to integrate that, and also accept that if decision makers in positions that can bring about the kind of material change that we need in the world in order to make the world a more habitable place. So presumably UAE ministers, as well as other people in positions of power, if they accepted that, there would be a different basis for decision making, and there's conflict there as well, because again, we're still humans. So decision makers that make decisions like that feels like the right direction, but I'm looking at the numbers. And well, if we keep on polluting, or we keep on selling this particular product, even though it doesn't really make sense to keep selling it, because I don't know, the one that everyone has seems to work just fine, but let's do another one. And that you have to, the machine just gets out of control, because of all the kinds of structure that exists that make it impossible to make the other decision at your own peril. So someone at I don't know, I hear the new iPhone camera is pretty sweet, so I'm kind of like, but I don't need a new iPhone. Mine works perfectly fine. But someone there was like, what are you going to tell me? You can tell me we're going to stop making these things?
Yeah.
That,
The
I'll be
genius
out of
there,
here. I'll
but
be out of the job in a minute. They'll kick me out.
What the genius was figuring out the trade-in value, so you can take your 1-year-old phone and get as much as you possibly can. So what's the cost of a new phone? Oh, it's only $300 or $400. Now that feature,
Yeah.
I totally want. And now the equation totally changes. So I'm like, yeah, I think I might actually get it this time instead of waiting a year or two.
Yeah.
So back to the structure of it. I'm not going to assume everybody watching this has already fully read the book. So let's try and explain a little bit of this to people who haven't. I think that just hearing the words design fiction, you could very easily say, oh, it means it's science fiction or it's storytelling about a product in the future. And there's some caveats that you give in the book that are make it really clear that it's not supposed to always be a correct design. In fact, it's almost better if your design fiction artifact is something that's a little off in some ways, because the world is messy, the future isn't perfect, and if your exercise was to try to design it right, you've probably done the wrong thing. What you're really trying to do, my understanding of this, and jump in if you want to correct any of this, is you're really trying to prod people to think differently. And so the artifacts of design fiction are there to get you to get in the right mindset, as opposed to solve a problem like what is our next product going to be. Is that
to
right?
provoke, right?
Yeah, to provoke.
Yeah, that's right. So the and also to represent kind of the completeness of the world as opposed to the completeness of the, you know, the product, if that's the
Yes.
where you're going to go. And I think that for me is like that's the fun magical part. So I think it came up in a conversation the other day where it's like kind of walking through someone who is yeah, just playing around trying to figure this stuff out. It's like one of my favorite archetypes is the product advertisement, because it's very condensed, compact, and what we're trying to do is probably less, you know, come up with a new product idea so much as to like tell a story about a world in which something like this would exist. And so one of the projects that we're just now kind of wrapping up is a magazine from the future, it's like a trade magazine from the future of filmed entertainment, future of Hollywood is kind of how we think about it. So it's like, imagine if you went to a newsstand and there was like a variety magazine or something, or maybe there's a super niche film magazine called Cinematographer. So if you're in Hollywood, you know about it. And it's, you know, it's just like kind of go through and it's like, this is how this was shot. This is a noted director. This is, you know, some of the nuances and details of production for this one particular thing. It's total nerd magazine, very beautifully designed and glossy and that kind of stuff. And in it, throughout it, you'll have advertisements, definitely not for the regular consumer, but it'll be like the new, you know, like a new RE or Panavision camera, or they'll and so those are the nice fancy ads, you know, beautifully shot, beautifully lit. And then in the back it's kind of the remnant ads, sort of like for a props house in the valley, you know, Joe's props, we've worked with everyone kind of thing. And it's just like a little thing. And I think those to me fill in the story of the world that we live in. And so with the even with the fancy ad, and particularly with the remnant ad, you can find these ways to imply the nature of the world. Forget about the technical characteristics, but like in the, let's say the camera, one of the things that we were trying to explore and try to imagine into is like, how does, I mean, this is the centerpiece of the labor dispute as I understand it. It's like AI, what's the deal? Like, and a lot of a lot of the mostly, you know, the vocal, you know, famous actors they're highly activated, I think is the word. They're just, they've been activated by it, and they're just like, no, this doesn't make any sense, this is crazy, what are you guys talking about? And it's like, fair enough, I get it. It's an emotional thing because you're talking about your livelihood and this thing that you've done your entire life, you know, and you can say like, what, you're just gonna, and so I get that. And on the other side, it's like, what does the other side of this look like, right? Yeah. So if we accept, which I think is probably the case, like no one's going to turn off AI. I don't even know what that would mean. And it's going to exist, whether it's the other side of a very equitable, peaceful kind of, you know, everyone's harmonious negotiation. Doesn't seem like it's going to go that way. What does that look like? What is the satisfactory conclusion of that? And you can represent that as a characteristic of the camera without having to figure it out. You know, you can say adheres to, you know, term 27.3, you know, little text, adheres to terms 23/12 of the, you know, the SAG-AFTRA negotiations. So you're like, oh, okay, well, it does some AI stuff, but it was negotiated through. And the point, Helen, to your point, it's like you haven't solved the problem, but you've opened up the conversation. So then people are saying like, well, what could that possibly mean? What is this section of that contract? Good question. I certainly don't know. I'm not predicting, but I would love to talk about it. Maybe there's a little bit more detail, restricted to 30 seconds of likeness of these particular, and then the remnant ad. I remember because I did one of the remnant ads. It was a house, like now it's kind of boring, right? So this house that has lookalikes. Like we have the best Tom Cruise lookalike that you'll find anywhere in the marketplace. You're kind of like, oh, there's not just one place, there are a bunch of them. What happened there? Is this legit, or is it kind of like, is Tom Cruise in air quotes? So what does that mean? It's like a lookalike of Tom Cruise. So it's not Tom Cruise, it looks like him and looks enough like him that I can use him and throw him in the background in my cereal commercial or something. So that's where it starts to become fun, because now you're imagining into the world, and not just the binary, either all for it or all against it, but the negotiated kind of like awkward settlement of it.
Yeah, that
The Remnant
tension
House is
even.
it's great because it shows us all the things we might not need all the time, but occasionally we do. Like that time where you need a vintage 1950s car, somebody has one somewhere. You just don't need it all the time. So that tells you what has happened over those last 50 years to tell us, how these cars have been preserved, how many of them are there, and who even cares about it. So that's a great way to get into that story that shows us what's current. I think the hard thing about the actor part is that these are people, so we can't just warehouse the people. But they're, if it were, say, animatronics, there could certainly be a warehouse of old presidents that we've now replaced, right? That you could go rent, can go rent an old Disney version of Abe Lincoln if you really need it for your shot, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I love that aspect of the boring that you mentioned, Julian, and like the mundane. And that's one of the things I really appreciate in the book, is this kind of this earnest approach. And it made me think of maybe about 10 years ago, I saw Brian David Johnson, a futurist. I think he was at Intel, maybe working with Genevieve Bell back then. And he gave a keynote, and one of his slides was this image of a very slick and glossy futuristic room, very white, very shiny, and he paused and he said, oh, where's everybody's stuff? Like, what happened? Did everybody's stuff just magically disappear in the future? Have we suddenly not become hoarders? Like, where's the trash can? Like, where is all this stuff, right? And in your book, you talk about this too. You say, you talk about the future mundane and how the future is a partly broken space, which I loved. And you said, the skill of creating a compelling view of the future lies not in designing the gloss, but getting to the reality behind it. In the future, things will fail. And for the majority of people, this won't come up in the form of an exploding rocket ship, but more like showing up as a cat head on Zoom, which I love. And the future will include taxes, trash, transfer delays, allergies, all this stuff, and things will break, fail to perform. And so rendering the future as a partly broken space gives an audience something relatable. So I love that. And this idea of the boring, the ordinary, and what role does that play in design fiction?
Yeah, the normal, ordinary, everyday, kind of humble, mundane characteristics. I think it operates in this way that, it makes things legible.
Yes.
It makes it feel. So you use the word, I think you said, like, relatable. It feels like, and that's that's what you want to do. You want to draw people into this world, and also make it feel, in some sense, I think, like, kind of humble in a way, like you're just entering into this thing as if the world kind of like, this future that you've gone to has characteristics to it that are, I mean, it's a point of entry. It feels like a part of a world that maybe you would just, maybe even exists now. Like it's something that you just kind of stumbled across, like, oh, what's going on here? And it just comes back to, Avi, the thing you mentioned earlier, just, about the storytelling and what makes a great story is that kind of almost is like the production design. There's probably a word for it in the novel idiom, like setting the scene, setting the table,
the milieu.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah,
Yes.
this is where we are, and that's the part. I mean, it's just the thing where you feel yourself like starting to sink into it. Like, here we are, as opposed to just kind of like this happens and this happens. Is another reason why, like, I'm fascinated with production design. Like Alex McDowell, who also kind of operates in this space, celebrated production designer who's like kind of left Hollywood because he's like it's not creative enough, and just started his own company to create essentially experiences, leveraging experiences that you kind of go into, leveraging the experience that he had actually doing production design for like Minority Report, Fight Club, a bunch of amazing films. Um, and that helped. That's the thing. Like you want, I want to. This is I want to tell you a story about a world. I want to tell you a story about a world that feels more habitable. It's not going to be the easiest thing in the world to either hear. Definitely not the easiest thing in the world to tell the story. Just in terms of like trying to get it right and get it dialed. And I want to excite and activate your imagination to the degree where you're like, at first you're kind of like, huh, and that's like good enough. Like, okay, good. Like, the hook's set. And then I want you to start asking questions about it. Like, go ahead and luxuriate in your confusion and your wonderment,
I
right?
love that.
Because I don't know what it is either. Like, I'm just providing like it'd be like, I don't know. Have you gone to Meow Wolf?
I haven't, but I've seen it. Looks really fun. I mean,
They,
Avi,
they
have you been?
I haven't.
it's they do an amazing job of this. It just popped in my head because I went to the one with the grocery store. But you walk in, you're kind of like, oh my goodness, I'm in a grocery store for real. Like this feels like the real deal. Only everything's like slightly tweaked. And
Yeah.
then when you see someone actually walk through the butcher freezer, you're like, oh my god, something else is going on. There's something behind the butcher's freezer. So and that's a beautiful thing. And that was, I mean, to a certain degree, the well, maybe I can't remember if this was the case, but I mean, we were called World Design, right?
Yeah.
Back in Seattle, it was about that. It was like we're going to build worlds. So it's that's the other way in. People talk about world building
Hmm.
as a component, and kind of definitely kin to design fiction in many regards. Um, and oftentimes, if I'm asked to juxtapose the two, well, it sounds just like world design. It's like, yeah, to a certain degree, I'm trying to create a world, but I'm doing it from the ground up. So I'm not, and for me, the top down kind of God's eye view, I will deploy the world, and it has this kind of geography and these kind of people, and they're separated by this distance, and here are the warring clans and factions. You basically told the whole story to a certain degree, or the whole thing, but you're not. There's a sense of, for me, and I'm doing this just for the purposes of setting these two practices apart. There isn't there isn't a room to really wonder and ask questions. So if someone
Yeah.
said like, why does this river go this way? Someone might be like, well, the gravity of the world operates, from east to west rather, something. They would have a reason for it, as opposed to being like, oh, I don't know. I just wound up here just like you.
Yeah.
Let's look around. Let's try to find some clues.
Yeah. I
It
mean,
turns out that, sorry.
no,
Did you
no,
want
go
to ask a
ahead.
question first? Okay.
No, go.
I was gonna jump off on that, and especially the Minority Report part.
Yeah.
That I think the realization, at least that I had, and you probably all have had this too, is that just people are people, no matter when you're talking about past, present, future. That people from 100,000 years ago, if you plug them into a modern world, would probably act exactly the same ways that we do, and um, not discounting in the future AI and genetic engineering, all those things that might change us, but any story you tell that includes humans is going to be inherently similar, because we all make mistakes, we're all messy, we all sometimes take the same kind of shortcuts, and have the same kinds of misunderstandings. um, but you talked about, and I think you brought up in the book about how Minority Report showed some of those glitches, and how great is that
Exactly.
that they show them. And there's two examples that come to mind. One is in showing 3D videos of the future. When you look at them from the side, they're wrong, right? They're not 3D in the same way that every glossy 3D holographic screen has ever promised that it looks great from every angle. It looks terrible from the side. It only looks good from straight on. And they show that in the movie by moving the camera and showing you how bad it is from the side. Or at least I would call it bad, because it's all smeared, right? The imagery is all smeared. Somebody else might find that beautiful artistically, but I think it's the intent is that you would see the whole scene. And then the other example is when the main character is throwing his hands in the air and controlling this UI, and he makes a mistake. But it leads to this other question of was that even the right UI? Well, it was a very evocative UI, and it led to products, real products, where everybody could stand at a whiteboard and move. 100 people can stand at a wall, and everyone could stretch pictures and rotate pictures and move them around, and you have this giant digital chalkboard. that isn't necessarily the product that won out. Like you don't see that everywhere. You don't see a lot of people doing that on a daily basis. So you have to wonder, was that kind of user interface, while it was imaginative, was it very pragmatic? I think mainly because, we just can't hold our hands up for that long. I think it's unless you really practice, I can go about 15 minutes with my hands in the air, but if anybody doubts this, they can try. Just hold your arms up for 15 minutes at a minimum and see how you feel. That's mainly the reason why we use the mouse, which sits on our desk and barely requires any effort, is that we're all going to get tired if you ask us to do something like that. So that interface didn't quite work out in reality, although it's still cool, it's still provocative. Are there lots of examples of where somebody thinks their design fiction is cool and useful and they go try to build it? Let's say, in my opinion, the metaverse is one of those things, where you go and try to build it as it was prescribed in the fiction, and then you find out, maybe that form of it isn't actually what people want, or at least not everybody. Maybe some people want it and a lot of people don't. Can you think of examples like that where it's led us astray?
Yeah, so Astray's opinion, and your examples are a good one. So the Minority Report thing is it works well because it's cinematic, right? And so I think that was a right decision for that. And then John Underkoffler, I think you're referring to, like, he started a whole company just to do that stuff. So I'll take us back to the Hit Lab, because I've said this a bunch of times. I'm sure I told you when we saw each other recently, Avi, but when I asked Philip random, I was like, "Where's the lab manual?" And he just said, like, "Get yourself a copy of Neuromancer, man," and just kind of floated away. And I did, and it was all right there. It was before, I or anyone else said design fiction, but it didn't matter. It was like, oh wow, that was probably the first time that I experienced or understood or was able to connect. It wasn't immediate, but it was able to connect the role that science fiction has on shaping our imaginary. And so it wasn't just a dinner party conversation about Neuromancer. It was like, a very interesting, slightly peculiar and kind of lovable character saying, hippie guy saying, it's all right in there, man. It's all right in there. This is what we're building. And Philip, who I know might not agree. It's like, no, don't build that. But that's a reference point. That's one of probably potentially many reference points that were in the kind of individual and collective imaginations of all the people in the lab. Everyone probably had their own sort of perspective, but it cohered around this idea of an immersive 3D world that you could manipulate and that you could feel a certain sense of inclusion within and inhabiting in some kind of way. So we all had that. But we were using the language. Like, I remember we were calling it like the deck. Like, it was, there's nothing decky about it. It was what, 2 SGI something or others at $250,000 a pop, and 11-pound heavy sweaty biohazard of a face mask that everyone put on, and gloves. Talk about COVID. And so I think that we invested an incredible amount of resources and treasure and human capability to essentially translate this, let's call it a design fiction, into reality, including forming, societies, having symposia, all that kind of stuff. And there was an aspect of it where if we stopped and thought, we were kind of like, wait a minute, I read the Neuromancer again. It's like, I don't know if we want to build this world. Right. Is this really? Same thing, Snow Crash. It's a thing that only in fun, maybe, a little bit. Like, I would take, I couldn't do it possibly, but I'll take William Gibson, Bruce Sterling, Neil Stevenson, and probably a handful of others to task. It's like, you guys screwed us, just so you know. Like, I know you didn't mean to, but you created this vision of the world, which was, I'll admit it, it was evocative and compelling. And it's like, I wanted to be a cyberspace cowboy. Sure, sounds great. But also, they're kind of, because they're rebels slightly, with a vigilante kind of character to them, and like, but then would it really be cool to live in a storage container? You know what I mean?
No, it'd be terrible. At least Margaret Atwood says, don't do this. When you read The Handmaid's Tale, it's not a recipe. It's like, this is what's going to happen if you don't get your shit together. But these other stories are written as like, boy, this would be a pretty compelling future. And I kind of wish the authors would double down on yeah, it was dystopian. I was actually trying to
Yes.
warn you not to do that. And they don't always do that. They're not always in touch with that aspect of it of this would be terrible if we actually lived in this world. And we've made it dystopian so we could have a good story, but not because it's the world we want to live in.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's what we were talking about the other day, Avi, about to what degree does science fiction taint the future with these visions that it paints, and I mean, Julian, what's your take? Like, what do you think? Is that something that, as we're looking to the future, should we kind of steer away from that and imagine something that is messier and more centered around kind of reality, or is it something? I mean, I guess it's just a balance at the end of the day. What do you think?
Yeah, it's a really good question. My thinking around it isn't definitive, but it's like kind of my instinct is, if you can show worlds that feel more habitable, and I'm not,
Yes.
and it's a fine line because I think it's like uh, it takes time to be able to craft those kinds of things, and find the way. And so for me, it's just like an ongoing experiment, in trying to represent the world in all these different ways. And definitely the line that I think of, if there are two poles between like utopian and dystopian, which is a little bit of a setup, a little bit artificial. It's like somewhere in the middle, where you're showing the world as it is. Like, I mean, we spent a few minutes. I was antagonized by my technical setup here because there was a little bit of a buzz in the thing. It's like I've got. I mean, if you look at this equipment, this is like space age shit. This is not just whatever you're hoping your best. It's like, no, very purposely put together and this kind of stuff. And something somewhere isn't working, and that's the world. We can live with that. We can live with those kind of contingencies. Um, in the genre of storytelling, image making through storytelling, I've just been so excited about Solarpunk.
Hmm.
As a, I don't know if you call it like it feels more like a vibe than a fiction genre.
It's
Although,
way more optimistic, right? I think than I grew up with cyberpunk and
yes,
back
Yeah.
when we were 5, that was that was the big thing. But yeah, solarpunk is like, no, actually there is a way out. And there's a new term lately that people have been using a lot, protopian. It's neither
yeah,
dystopian nor the opposite, but it's more like intentional, right? It's
mhm,
like, let's build a future that we actually think about, that we actually
yeah.
plan and design to the best we can.
The
At least
the
that's my
interesting thing
understanding.
about Solarpunk, well, I mean, there are lots of interesting things about it, but the way in which you're kind of developing something that yeah, I guess becomes like a thing. You hope it becomes a thing. Like, let's talk it. Let's create stories. Let's create. It's got a rich kind of visual component to it, and it's like there was this famous, Giovanni, the yogurt people, did this commercial television advertisement, that was heralded as like, oh my god, this is like a Solarpunk vision from a commercial entity. That was kind of cool. It was very visionary. It felt like a Murakami film or something.
Mm.
Um, AOC, like I think it was a week ago, declared herself a Solarpunk. So you have a
Yeah,
member of Congress who's saying that, and that's kind of like, wow, that's the level I think you want to operate at, and again in a way that, you're not giving up on the structures that exist, as fraught and challenged and as kind of screwy as they are. But it's like, okay, well, is that one step closer to not everyone declaring themselves a solar punk, but people being like, wait, what is that?
Mm-hmm.
Huh?
yeah,
Never heard of it before. This is
yeah.
cool. I'm going to dig into it.
They should find out. I mean, that the best example of the optimistic future that you and I are huge fans of, I'm not sure, Helen, if you are, but Star Trek
Mm,
is, and not to get too geeked out here, but I think that the premise of Star Trek is the world will be better in the future. So here's a picture of a better world. Crazy shit still happens, right? The fringes of the Federation are still pretty wild. And in fact, they need to invent all sorts of things, like the equivalent of Bitcoin gets invented in Deep Space Nine, and all sorts of things that we have to deal with are there, and including all the race issues we talked about before, and things that are very real to us. But Star Trek was always this idea that things can work out, that we're going to design our way into a better future, even when we get it wrong. And there's certainly, we could spend an hour just talking about the things. Even though Star Trek was visionary, there's a bunch of stuff they got wrong as well, a bunch of stuff right. too. But it's it's a question of, can we evaluate these things well enough? Do we get so excited about the whole mood, the milieu, and the feeling of these futures? Because a good book is going to make us want to live in it, right? A good book is going to make us, when the book is over, we don't want it to be over. We want it to keep going. But can we then discern what is a good future and what isn't? I guess that's what we're trying to get out here, is at what facilities do we have after the imagination phase, and we think about, let's imagine harder and think of a new future. How can we come back and say, now let's design it right?
Yeah.
Let's actually use the filters that we've developed over the years to get to a better answer.
Yeah.
What do you think?
It's a really good one. And I think what I've come around to, and it's why sometimes I'll describe, design fiction as a conversation starter, because I don't think you can come to a conclusion within it, or know what's right or wrong, but you can use it as a start of engaging, at some level. I mean, it's the thing that happens, like if you're part of a book club, right? The point of the book club isn't necessarily just to read the book and know that other people are reading it, because that happens all the time. But it's like, let's read it, and now let's get together and let's talk about all different aspects of this world. And if you can do that with a sense of, let's say in a design fiction mode, with a sense of purpose, like I'm talking like literally within, a product design team of, of like Apple or whatever, like let's do a bunch of design fiction. And the point is, and we're not writing a spec, even if we use the specification as the archetype of the design fiction. The point of this is to have everyone kind of, put their artifact out there, again, not as a keynote presentation of, with beautiful renders and stuff, but more as the other side of the world in which this thing exists. An FAQ list that you have to do, or the quick start guide for your new thing, or a transcript from a customer, a Genius Bar, engagement, where you say, okay, yeah, this is interesting. Now I'm getting a sense of the shape of this thing. And don't do it so it's perfect. Do it's like, yeah, I don't know, I can't get my email account to log in. Just going into it that way. And it's not to antagonize people, say like, you're going to screw up this thing, because we know it's going to happen despite our best efforts. But it's almost like, could there be a ritual of the equivalent of a book club, but for design fiction artifacts? Like, tell me a story about the world through a material artifact. Don't write, a novel. Don't even write a short story. Write what you thought would have been in the short story, but as one of the objects in that story, as if you went to that world, you dug it up from the accretion of time, and you're like, oh my God, look at this. Here's a quick start guide for this Winklemeyer wristwear thing or whatever.
Yeah. You know what comes to mind actually are the surrealists and artists, and even thinking of like Duchamp and his ready-mades, and even thinking about Salvador Dali and these wonderful objects that he would create, like the lobster phone, like these things that were just slightly menacing that kind of looked familiar, right? To your point earlier about even Meow Wolf and these kinds of experiences where they kind of look rooted in reality, but there's just something a little off. And so, we've talked a lot about cinema, about even television and science fiction writing. And so what I also wonder is, what is the role of artists in all of this? And I know for a good piece of design fiction, it's important that it circulates, right? So it's not something that is in a museum. It's something that's easily accessible. And I think about artists like Oliver, I'm going to massacre his last name, Eliasson, the Icelandic artist, and how he's done. You have his book right there too. Yes. I love that you always.
You got the killer library. We're gonna have to.
Yeah, I know. I need to come over there. And so his really very prescient, like really early work, like 10, 20 years ago, even just in museums, and people were sharing images of a couple of months back when New York was just the sun was an orange ball in the sky, and it looked very much like one of his exhibits. And so I wonder about artists and how, maybe they're just especially in tune to these faint signals that we were talking about earlier. But what is the role of art, you think, in design fiction, and even, being prescient to the future, and maybe even warning us a little bit and listening more to artists a bit more often?
That probably couldn't hurt to do that. I think that there's like a long, rich history and tradition of the I guess the consciousness of the kind of artistically or creatively minded individual who doesn't give up, or doesn't let that facility or that faculty or that ability to imagine kind of dissipate, which sometimes happens depending on what kind of household you grow up in. It's like around like 7, maybe 8 years old or something like that. It's like, stop screwing around, stop stop daydreaming. It's time to, what do you want to be when you grow up? And they're probably like billions of parents when their child says like, I want to be an artist. They're just kind of like, oh my god, oh
Yeah.
my god, oh my god, oh my god. Kids, what's wrong with being an engineer? And
And how are you going to make money is the next question.
yeah, that's it, because that's structure imposing itself, with all, I'm sure there are like really good meaningful reasons why a parent would say that, and it comes from, presumably it comes from the heart, unless you're in like the Roy family from Succession. But the idea is like, what we want is to encourage more of that. So we want more artists, with an artist sensibility, but not artists that are afraid of structure, artists who think of like, well, if I do anything commercial, I'm selling out. No, we want that kind of creativity. We want it at the heart of the kinds of organizations that are going to, be able to bring about the material change that we need in order to avert, name your favorite existential crisis. But I mean, I could go up, make a big list. Like there's Ant Farm, which is another sort of experimental art group that did amazing kind of imagined work. Archigram, which is oftentimes referred to a lot by people in the kind of speculative design fiction area, because they were doing this. They were an architecture firm, but they did these things. It's like, you can't make a building walk, but they would render these things in such a powerfully evocative, visually rich way. You wanted to see it. It was like, when you see it, if you had any of your 8-year-old kind of creative consciousness still, you'd be like, whoa, this is cool. And you want people who are able to create that, whoa, this is cool kind of feeling out of the work, even if it's not meant for necessarily for a gallery. Tom Sachs is another artist. He's just got this kind of playful sensibility where he's creating these, kind of familiar yet strange objects, like a Chanel chainsaw, and just playful with the way in which things that we take for granted as just products only existing in the world of the rational utilitarian. Why would I want, a drill made out of a block of wood with a NASA logo on the side of it? It's like, it doesn't make any sense at all, but it does. And this is an art, the good artists, the effective ones, the ones who are able to push through all the challenges, are doing sense making. This is the way I see the world. And if it entertains you, that's amazing. You can dive deeper into the work. I mean, Tom Sachs has done these like entire reenactments of like the Apollo landing in a gallery, and they're beautiful. They're amazing.
What is a question you have your own podcast, we'll ask you to plug in a minute, and you've been on a bunch of podcasts. And so what is the question that you want to be asked that nobody's ever thought to ask you?
What's the difference between science fiction and design fiction? I think, Helen, you mentioned it's like, isn't design fiction like the story of the object?
Yeah, that's a good question.
I wish I would get that question like more directly, because oftentimes it has come up as a point of where I have to clarify. Whoa, wait a second. Let me just clarify this for you.
Yeah.
So that's the question. Should I ask the question? Are you gonna?
No, go ahead and answer it. Well, we got the question, so I think your answer is no. But go ahead. I'm reading your book.
Why don't you answer the
I'm pretty
question?
sure your answer is no. But why don't you tell us why?
Yeah, the answer is no, and I think for like a really important reason, which is that fictional stories about possible futures already have their genre called science fiction, and it's got this incredibly rich history, and I don't think there's really any need to expand it or bolt something else onto it. And I think the distinction, the history of the distinction is what I'm drawn to. So it's not, I didn't just call it design fiction, like sitting next to Bruce Sterling just because it would be cool, but there's like this history that predates that, before we kind of uttered it and kind of like looked at each other like, sounds good, like I like that. It was because Bruce was learning design. He was like in residence at Art Center, to they probably gave him like a nice appointment and kind of said like, hey, just hang out here, and he did a couple talks and that kind of stuff. But he was literally studying design. How do designers think and make, and learning the tools and playing with the 3D printers and all that kind of stuff, which is like amazing. Both, obviously for the school to be able to say like, hey, Bruce Sterling's here and we're going to be doing these talks, for the students to be able to kind of, hang out with him because he's a very genial guy. It's not like he's aloof. So he's hanging out like, hey, what are you doing, kid? Kind of thing. And the thing for me that was remarkable, it sounds like crazy, but I was just like, oh my God, you can learn that. Like you can go, even, a person who's like of his note, you might think, be like, I'm done learning. I'm good. I'll just keep writing. But he's like, wanted to learn this other thing. And he was making stuff. I can't remember. I don't think it was particularly, beautiful or like what I mean, it probably was beautiful, but it wasn't like that was his ambition now to become like start selling chairs and lamps or whatever. But he had a crack at it. And I just admired that. And that you look at him, you say like, okay, we know this guy can write. Now he's learning to like, take that his same brain and think about the world through objects and make those objects, not just think of them as, well, it probably, describing it looks like this and it's got a big valve on the right side of it. And that's what, our protagonist will pull in order to travel into the future or whatever. But he's like, I want to make things. And I just thought that was a revelation. It's so simple. But it gives you this sense of like, oh, there's so many things, beautiful things that we can do with our imagination. And we kind of focus on, I don't want to, I mean, I've done it too. It's like, we focus on like, what's a good product idea? What's a great business that's going to make me a billionaire? I don't know. They're constrained. We don't think that our imagination can translate across those boundaries between these different practices. Like, I think I mentioned, obviously, like my company, my last company, so not that I've got tons of them. I sold it, and I'm absolutely convinced it was because I wrote an annual report for the company from the future and stopped doing pitch decks. So there's a 96-page annual report from the future, and that just happened to go out with whatever else I sent out as my initial whatever foray into having a conversation with them. And they said on the other side, when we're having like steaks and Malbec celebrating it, they're like, that annual report was amazing. Like that, we just saw that there was something tangible that we could sink our teeth into. And it's all like, there's no, I didn't say anything in the annual report saying like, hey, this is a fictional annual report. It was just like, they just got this thing that said,
no, but you should totally do that instead of a pitch deck. That makes way more sense than making a bunch of promises as to what we can do. Is like, if we succeed, here's what it looks like. And I don't want to take too much time now, but I could go into how Amazon works and how Microsoft work and how Apple works and talk about those correlations. Maybe we'll do that as a bonus feature.
That would be a great bonus feature. Because I'd be curious, because related to that, it's like a guy is starting a fund, and we just had a coffee, and he was like, wait, an annual report from the future? Like, he was floored.
Yeah,
and I'm not saying that to say that I've got the greatest ideas in the world, but it was also a little bit surprising to me that I guess in a naive way, it's like, why isn't everyone doing this? Why isn't there a curriculum within every MBA? The curriculum is like how to design a great pie chart.
This is your next book. I think you figured it out already. That if you go sell that as a business book, is writing your future annual report, then no, that's going to sell even more copies than this one, because there's people who will read that just to be like, how can I make money?
There's something that I've been dying to ask you. So, you're talking about being a billionaire. You've already done it. You've already got your billionaire product. It's in the book. It's AR eye drops. Okay. And I swear, when I saw those, I'm like, I needed this yesterday. Okay. When is this going to be in my local pharmacy? When can I get it on Amazon? So can you tell us just a little bit about the background behind it? Because I was fascinated by it. So all those things that you said about that moment of wonderment, where it's something that looks like it's real, but there's something slightly off. And I had one of those, hey, wait a second moments. Like, can I get this right now? Is this available? Or is this not real? So yeah, tell us a little bit about that product, that imagined product.
Yeah, so that was one of a suite of design fiction artifacts that I put together for a very large search engine company that should remain nameless, for a workshop with them. And they were just kind of like, hey, this design fiction thing is kind of cool. Can we do some stuff together? And part of that was we just needed to have a bunch of products from a future world in order to set a scene. So it wasn't an AR project at all. Matter of fact, there was no particular specific. They weren't chasing after anything. They weren't like, hey, this is the product team from our AR team. it was more like, hey, I just want to set dress this world, right? Back to the production design thing. And so that was one of the things, along with a coupon to a AR yoga, um, joint, whatever, on the
I love it.
corner, and a bunch of other things. So that was all just kind of material that was like around,
Amazing.
to help. You got that entry point to get people into the world. I think there's probably some technical language from the world of, theater or experience design. How do you get people? Or Vegas is probably their masters of this. Like, as you get closer and closer and closer, you kind of go through these rings of experience where now, okay, now you can feel like you're in the world.
Awesome. What year was that?
If I had to guess, it was probably like 2017 or 18, I want to say.
Yeah. Wow. Nice. Yeah. So get on that. I could really use some ARI
It's
drops
it's a
and some
great
AR
one.
yoga.
It'd be the kind of thing where it's like I would ignore it because I'd be like, nah, that sounds like a cheapo kind of like throwaway thing.
Oh,
But
good.
then someone in a condo in Florida was like, we got it, and we don't even care about the science. I mean, these are
Oh,
just
totally.
like,
Like, remember Head On? Remember that the advertisements for Head On?
Oh
They
yeah.
they would just repeat Head On, apply directly
Head
to the
on.
forehead,
Head on.
and
Yeah.
never say what it does. You don't. They're implying it's for headaches, but they never even claim it because they'll get sued if they ever said it's actually
yeah.
medically has any efficacy whatsoever. So they just sell it as ARIs. It's for your eyes. You use AR. You have eyes. You need
Do you have
ARIs.
eyes? Exactly.
Yeah,
Totally.
I'm laughing. I
Amazing.
shouldn't be laughing. I should be getting right on it.
You should trademark that. Yeah, I'd say Neil
Exactly.
Stephenson's one mistake, I think, really his biggest mistake was not trademarking the metaverse.
Yeah.
It would have saved a lot of confusion if we could just go, Neil, what is it? Just tell us what it is. So okay, so let's make sure we get a chance here to we'll wrap up, and then if we have time for the bonus, we'll do the bonus discussion after. So tell us about your company, your podcast, and anything else that you want to plug right now. We've talked about the book. Tell us where we could buy the book, and anything else that somebody listening to this who's been enjoying this will need to know.
Yeah, so Near Future Laboratory is the place, nearfuturelaboratory.com, and this is the current state of the experiment is that I want to find the way in which you can have like an organization like Near Future Laboratory, which is very informal, as more of a collective, and actually do design fiction and do it in an organic way. So everything that we do is kind of happens from within the studio. So basically right here. And I also wanted to experiment with being as fiercely independent as we could be. So we sell all of our own stuff on shop.nearfuturelaboratory.com. It's not for a variety of mostly practical reasons, that worked out better because it's this is going to sound extractive, but it's like I want the connection with the people who are reading the book. I want that to be a point of entry for joining the community, or sometimes I refer to it as like the hyper collaborative or whatever. And so if someone buys a book directly from my Shopify store, nothing fancy about it, then that connection is there. And I can tell them like, hey, also, did you know that this is the world's first book to come with a community? It probably isn't, but practicing my
Yeah.
marketing. World first book to come with a community. Here's an invitation to our Discord. And a fair number of people join, and they join, and then we get a connection directly. And the feeling of creating a community based on that is, I mean, that's really where my heart is. Once I realized that that's what going to happen, because I started doing, every time someone joins, we grab a coffee together. So we get on a Zoom call, 20 minutes, usually goes much longer. And that, I think, is one of those elements of bringing about the kind of worldly change that I'm hoping to do. Is just people like, oh, you're just a regular guy. Like, I never got this from Stephen King when I bought his latest novel. This is kind of cool. And then the good
Yes. Well,
vibes
it
kind
might
of
kill
ensue.
you if you have to be a little careful about his novels.
Yeah,
the,
that's
the the
right.
community is a little dangerous in that case, but yes, I get your point. So we'll make sure we have all the URLs on our website where we post the podcast. People can just click on those instead of having to write them down. We wanted to make
Yeah.
sure we heard it at least once. Is there anything we missed that you wanted to talk about your endeavors? You do a podcast from the Near Future Laboratory. You have the book. You have these other workshops that you do that I remember.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so we do general seminar, which is a kind of, it's like a mini design fiction workshop. So it's like this super fun 90-minute workshop. The great thing about it is like you just come up with a topic, right? And then people want to imagine these futures. So it's kind of fun. It's like we do things. It's like we hop in a time machine. People kind of break out, and with a topic, they try to find the artifacts that they would imagine in these worlds. So the last one we did just a few days ago was the future of the org, kind of like if there were a future evolution of like corporations or as we understand them, or even roles within jobs and that kind of thing. What might that look like? And it's a hard one because it's hard to imagine because we've only lived in a world where there've been like a handful of kinds of organizations like family, religion, corporation is kind of where we're left with. So what else would there be? It's kind of interesting, and so you start trending into that. And so that's what General Seminar does. And then Super Seminar started because I like the name, and I was like, well, what would that be? And it would be a kind of thing where we would have someone of note who's kind of exists in a where they have some knowledge and experience in a particular domain. So so it's like not quite masterclass because you will have people who are masterful in a particular area, but we kind of reverse everything. So it's a tight 15 or 20-minute presentation and then a 25 or 30-minute discussion so that people get to actually participate. Because I've been frustrated enough going to like book talks and there's always the first person because they only got 10 minutes for questions says like, I got one question in 4 parts. And you're like, oh man, this is not gonna work out.
Exactly.
Yes.
I have 35 questions.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for being
Thank
on
you,
our
Julian.
first episode of our podcast. We enjoyed it thoroughly. We'd love to have you for every episode, but we have to cover lots of people. So we will we will say goodbye and look forward to seeing you again next time as soon as possible.
This has been super fun.
Absolutely.
Super
Love
fun.
the book. Love the book so much. I was saying
Thank
to
you,
Abby, I was trying to, I have to admit, just, I was trying to power through it initially, but it's not a book you power through. I was like, I need to absorb as much of this content as possible fast. But I'm like, I would go back and just read passages, and it's beautifully written. It's honest. It's just a gorgeous book. So thank you. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for sharing your knowledge with us.
Thank you for that. It's very generous. Thank you.